Born in a relatively small family in the Indian city of Nagpur, Aku Yadav became something of a local menace as he grew older. As he entered his late teens, the miscreant child had graduated into a full-time criminal, and given how frighteningly intelligent the boy seemed to be, it wasn't long before he was running his own cartel of cruel and violent thugs. The gang ruled over the Kasturbar Nagar slum they called home, robbing, killing, and torturing all those who stood in their way, and with near impunity. After just a few years, Aku found he rarely needed to resort to violence anymore. The atmosphere of fear he and his underlings had cultivated meant he'd made most of his money from simple extortion, and he made weekly rounds to collect protection money that each small business owed him. That, and leaving dead bodies around the slum, was a massive inconvenience for him. It meant he'd have to pay handsome bribes to local police officers to ensure his little fiefdom went untouched. Murder was bad for business. However, Aku found a form of punishment much more suited to his mode of operation: indecent assault. As we've mentioned, murder was only likely to cause even more trouble for Aku and his gang, and part of their problem was figuring out how to effectively silence those who stood against them. A person could recover from a beating, one that would most likely just make them angry. But in India, as with many parts of the world, being the victim of an indecent assault can be a very stigmatizing event. Attack a woman in that manner, and she wouldn't breathe a word to anyone, and what's more, you effectively have something to hold over her, a piece of information one might use to manipulate and coerce. It's a form of terrorism that Aku employed on a yearly basis, and those who fell victim to it had absolutely no form of legal recourse. Handsome police bribes ensured that no investigation would be opened, allowing Aku and his minions to rob, assault, and intimidate at will. Some Kasturba Nagar residents said that every single shack or cramped apartment in the entire slum housed some victim of Aku's horrifying malice, the youngest of which was a 10-year-old girl. In one incident, Aku personally took the life of a woman named Asha Bai. "We were eating dinner when he came to the front door and pretended to be a friend of my brother," said Asha's daughter. "When my mother opened the door, he dragged her out and stabbed her. He then cut off her ears for her earrings and her fingers because he could not get her rings." Asha's mother, a woman named Anjana Bai Bukhar, was also forced to witness her death. Another woman described how she and her husband were attacked by Aku in the middle of the night. He arrived at our house at around 4 or 5 in the morning, banging loudly on the door and telling us he was from the police. When my husband opened the door, Aku stabbed him in the thigh, almost completely immobilizing him. Then, in full view of my husband, Aku violated me over and over again, until long after the sun had risen. The number of accounts like that are seemingly endless, with some of the worst describing how Aku defiled women in the hours after they were married, or how he cut off another's chest after her daughter was unable to pay her protection money. But perhaps the worst account is the story of how Aku carnally violated a woman just 10 days after she'd given birth. The shame was too much for her, and as a result, the woman marched into a bustling marketplace, doused herself in kerosene, then set herself on fire. Finally, after years of terrorizing the Kasturbar Nagar slums, the police decided that Aku's iron-fisted rule had to be curtailed. Numerous attempts to ban him from the area, including being detained for over a year under emergency powers, was completely ineffective. Aku simply delegated to his lieutenants who still operated in the slums or ignored the rulings entirely. What's more, Aku had found a way to kill and maim with complete impunity by targeting the minority communities known as Dalits. With their name rooted in the Sanskrit word for broken, the Dalits belong to those inhabiting the lowest caste in Indian society and are often known simply as the Untouchables. They are subjected to some horrendous forms of bigotry, and according to a 2007 report by International Human Rights Watch, the treatment of Dalits is India's hidden apartheid. and that the Dalits endure segregation in housing, schools, and access to public services. Needless to say, the police weren't so interested in investigating crimes committed against the Dalits. They didn't even ask for bribes to keep them quiet. Yet what's clear is that, despite the fear Aku had instilled in the Kasturbar Nagar slums, the people could only take so much abuse before they began to lash out. And it seems that any serious and organized resistance began with a woman named Usha Narayani. You see, Usha refused to be intimidated by Aku and his goons, and continually demanded that local police take action against him on her behalf. Every single day she called by to check if her complaints were being dealt with, and each time, she took her indignation further and further up the chain of command. But instead of actually dealing with her complaint, the police warned Aku that Usha was causing trouble for them and needed to be dealt with. And so, that night, Aku and 40 of his most brutal foot soldiers surrounded Usha's home and demanded she come out. It was reported that Aku carried only one weapon, a bottle of sulfuric acid, and told Usha if she merely withdrew her police report, that everything would be fine. She refused. Aku then began to bark out, "I'll throw acid on your face, and you won't be in a position to file any more complaints. If we ever meet you, you don't know what we'll do to you. Being violated is nothing compared to what we'll have in store. You hear me? Nothing. We'll burn you alive, cut you into pieces, and then feed you to stray dogs." Yet, instead of kowtowing to such threats, Usha began to barricade the doors to her home. This only infuriated the criminals, who made short work of the barricades and forced their way into the house. However, once they were inside, a frighteningly familiar smell graced their nostrils. It was the smell of gas, and standing before them, box of matches in hand, was Usha Narayani. "Get out of my house, or I will burn us all," she growled. And for the first time in a long time, Aku was the one who was terrified. They were forced to abandon the attack, but Aku obviously didn't take the defeat well, and began to plot a terrible revenge against the woman who had so embarrassed him. The next day, news of Usha's successful defiance spread like wildfire among the Kasturba Nagar slums. Many celebrated, but many also saw it as an opportunity to make even further gains from Aku and his men. Dalits flooded the streets, armed with sticks and stones, and began to attack Aku's lieutenants on sight. Then, on August 6th of 2004, a group of furious Dalits closed in on Aku's lavish house on the edge of the slums. They smashed their way inside, chased away the guards, looted the place, and then put it to the torch. The cheers and celebratory singing could be heard for miles around. Aku was on the run, and in a hilariously hypocritical twist, he turned to the police to protect him from the mob. And it's while he's in police custody that those wishing retribution against him began to make their moves. Aku was held in one single static location, a location known to thousands of Kasturbar Nagar residents. And on the 13th of August 2004, they made their move. After hearing that Aku was about to be released after a corrupt bail hearing, hundreds of angry women marched down to the courthouse that Aku was being held at. At first, their gathering appeared to be a furious but relatively peaceful protest, and police even allowed a few of the women into the courtroom to bear witness to bail hearing, having assured them that it would be fair and impartial. Yet when Aku appeared in the courtroom at around 2:30 p.m., he was arrogant, disrespectful, and entirely unrepentant. When one woman took the stand to accuse him of violating her, Aku laughed out loud, mocking her and saying he'd do it again if he could. This elicited laughter from a few of the police officers in attendance. Some say the laughter was in response to how immature Aku was acting, but what's clear is that to the women on the stand, as well as those in attendance, the laughter was the final straw. One woman launched herself at Aku, taking off her sandal and striking him about the head with it. Officers of the court tried to restore order, and the sight of them protecting the very man who had terrorized them for so long sent the women into a frenzy. Yet what followed wasn't outright chaos, so much as orchestrated chaos. The women of Kasturba Nagar hadn't just shown up that day on a whim. Oh no, they had a plan. A plan that was perhaps as simple as it was effective. You see, the women who showed up to the court that day did so concealing all manner of bladed articles. They knew well that the Nagpur courthouse had metal detectors, ones that would easily reveal any kitchen knives or other steel weapons they tried to smuggle in. To get around that, the women of Kasturba Nagar had conspired to start something of a cottage industry, one focused solely on the production of what we might call prison shanks. They made knives out of plastic, out of wood, out of glass, and when they ran out of material, they made knives out of sharpened pieces of rock. But in addition to these deadly homemade blades, the women carried small baggies of what would prove to be a surprisingly effective non-lethal weapon: chili powder. So when the officers of the court moved to restrain them, all it took was one handful of chili powder blown into a cop's eyes, and he was out of the fight. Once all of the officers protected him had been incapacitated, Aku was no longer the cocky, gloating figure he'd been just minutes before. Instead, he begged for his life. "Forgive me, please," he said to have wailed. "I won't hurt anyone anymore. I'll leave Nagpur for good. None of you will ever hear from me again. Just please don't kill me." A single woman approached him, and the room fell silent. It was Anjana Bai Bukhar, whose daughter had been murdered by Aku before her very eyes. "Aku, Yadav," she began. "We can't both live on this earth together. It's either you or us." And with that, the attack began in earnest. It's thought that Aku Yadav was stabbed by almost 400 women that day as he lay helpless on the marble floor of the Nagpur courtroom. They had agreed to all stab him at least once, plunging the blades into his body before passing them on to the next woman. The women poured the remainder of the chili powder into his eyes and up his nostrils, while one began to slice off his reproductive organs before holding them above her head like a bloody trophy. Some say it took Aku at least 30 minutes to actually expire, and when he was dead, the entirety of the courtroom's bright white marble flooring was soaked in his blood. The man himself lay dead from literally hundreds of stab wounds at just 32 years of age. When the attack was finished, the women of Kasturba Nagar returned to their husbands and fathers to tell them that they had killed Aku Yadav. The entire slum seemed to burst into celebration. That night, families blasted out music into the streets, dancing and cheering in pure jubilation. Households gifted fruit and food to their neighbors, a tradition normally associated with the holiest of Hindu holidays. The police honed in on the woman who had given birth to the resistance, the same woman who had flooded her own house with gas before threatened to roast Aku and herself alive. Usha Narayani was arrested and charged with murder, but a crowd of 400 women and more than 100 men and children gathered at the courthouse, each saying that they were the ones solely responsible for Aku's murder. And as a result, no one could be charged, and in 2012, Usha was officially acquitted of all charges. Retired Indian High Court Judge Bahal Vahani publicly defended the woman who lynched Yadav, saying that, in the circumstance they underwent, they were left with no alternative but to finish Aku. The women repeatedly pleaded with the police for their security, but the police failed to protect them. If they took law into their own hands, it was because the law and law enforcing agencies had not given them succor. Some did attempt to condemn the murder, saying that extrajudicial killings were completely unacceptable. And as much as they're legally and morally correct, there's no denying that the women of Kasturba Nagar were only capable of taking a certain amount of abuse before they decided to lash out and wreak a terrible retribution. And in the case of Aku Yadav, that retribution came in the form of an agonizing, terrifying, and drawn-out death, and arguably one that he very much deserved. I can't speak for the grinder experience in Western communities, but I can speak for one particular grinder experience from here in India. India can be quite a progressive country in some ways and quite an intolerant country in others. For example, we have the Hijra here, which are like Indian transgender or third gender people who have been accepted for thousands of years. They are even part of the Hindu religion, and Eravanis, as they are sometimes called, take part in a festival in which they marry the Hindu god Eravan, and then mourn his death by ritual sacrifice. But like I said, India can be very homophobic too, and although same-gender partners were technically recognized in 2018, same-gender marriages still aren't legal, and almost a quarter of the Indian people are strongly against it. So as you can imagine, dating apps can be an absolute blessing when it comes to finding partners, or in my case, they can be an absolute curse. I matched with one guy, and he was really, really cute, so immediately I shared a picture of myself asking him if he wanted to meet up. I'm a little bit older than some of the cuter guys in my area, and I fairly rarely get a reply from them. But when this guy actually messaged back, I got so very excited, and we quickly arranged for him to visit my apartment. When he tells me he's on his way, he asked to see a few more pictures of me so he can know what he's looking forward to. Of course, I show him, and because I'm so very excited to meet him, I don't really think anything of him asking me to see me in my work clothes. He said he liked a man in a shirt and tie, and since I worked in an office here in Mumbai, I had plenty of professional and not-so-professional shots on hand. His questions continued to get quite personal, asking where I worked, but when I confronted him on it and asked why he seemed to be interrogating me, he replied that it was for his own safety. He'd been with some rough guys in the past, and he was worried something might happen to him. I thought that was just the sweetest thing, so after assuring him that my intentions were nothing but good, I answered every question he had of me. About an hour later, he shows up, and he looks even better than his pictures. I can't believe how lucky I am. He looks fantastic, and he seems to really actually like me. We had drinks, chatted about this and that, and after an awkward first kiss, we fell into bed together. It was honestly one of the most magical nights of my life. I never had much luck finding partners. I'm definitely not the most handsome desi gay guy out there, so such a wonderfully romantic evening was just a dream come true for me. When it was over, we cuddled for a while, and I was so happy to hear that he wouldn't mind meeting me again sometime. Then he got up, went to the bathroom for a drink of water, and began to put his clothes on again. It was quite late at that point, so I figured he just needed to leave because of work in the morning or something, and just as I'm about to give him a kiss goodbye, he looks me dead in the eyes and says, 30,000 rupees. I thought he was joking. I really did. And when he held out his hand to me, I laughed a little. But the look on his face was deadly serious. He seemed to get offended when I laughed at what turned out to be a very serious demand. The thing that really got to me, though, was how rehearsed his routine was. As soon as I showed any sign that I wasn't willing to give him the money, he turned nasty, started clapping his hands and really shouting about how, "Oh, you're not going to pay me for this? We just had it. Do your neighbors know that you're gay?" I think he must have pegged me as a shy, half-out gay guy from the get-go. He must have known I lived in a nice place where my neighbors or parents wouldn't have approved of my lifestyle. I begged him to be quiet as he took his phone out and showed me what was obviously an addition to his profile, a little code word we have for male escorts that, well, I won't reveal here for obvious reasons, but I swear to you, it wasn't there when we talked, and to my horror, I was being rather effectively blackmailed. And for 30,000 rupees too, that's about $400, a lot for me, and I could be considered to be quite well off here for my white-collar job. So much that there's no way I had all that cash on me, so he just took what was in my wallet, then demanded I take him to a cash machine. My last line of defense was telling him that I just didn't have the money in my account. But he recognized the lie instantly and raised his voice again, calling me expletives and calling me cheap. At this point, my neighbors are actually looking out of the windows because he's raising his voice on the walkway outside my apartment. I have to beg with him with tears forming my eyes. Please don't show them. They don't know. He smiled such a sick smile after that, knowing that he had me by the balls, and all I could do was roll over and let it all happen. We had to go to 2 different ATMs, his insistence, not mine, to withdraw the full amount. And that's when he basically rubbed salt in the wounds by calling some of his friends on his phone to gloat about how he's got a big one tonight. And I'm not talking about his ling. At the start of the night, I was so excited, and at its peak, I thought I'd found true love. But then there I was, feeling stupid, scared, and utterly humiliated, being robbed blind by a soulless, heartless predator. When we were finished getting the money, he told me to drop him off somewhere, and he even had the cheek to thank me for a good night. When I drove back home, I actually thought about taking my own life. The feelings were just too much for me, and I wasn't sure if I could stand to feel them any longer. But instead, I just got drunk and cried until I fell asleep. Perhaps the worst thing is that my neighbors suspect something now. I know they look at me different, and they're not nearly as friendly as they used to be. I think I might move somewhere else soon, maybe look for a new job too, because I really cry for help inside. I really don't deserve this, and I wonder what I did so terrible that it actually happened to me. So please, never share any intimate pictures unless you really trust the person, and make sure to trust them before you invite them over to your place. I live in a small rural community in the eastern United States. It's a nice little town, and because of my work in the medical field, I've met some interesting folks. I'm also familiar with law enforcement and emergency personnel. Small town life is not as dull and uneventful as people think, especially since everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. I have a lot of stories to share, but since this one just happened, I'll start here. Because it's still very recent and the investigation is ongoing, I have to be vague with some details, but I needed to tell someone. I'm single and live alone. Due to a stalker, I've moved twice, but that's another story for another time. However, it is relevant for this story for multiple reasons. The first reason being that I have a dog for the sake of protection, as well as have motion sensors and outdoor security cameras. The second reason being the location of my home, which is literally down the street from the fire department. I can see it from my living room window right now, and a couple of blocks from the police station. However, next to the fire department is the road department, which is basically a parking lot where they park their road equipment and empty garage trucks at night and on weekends. Oddly, it doesn't have a security camera. Small town life, I suppose. My house sits on a hill with a good view of that side of the street. Due to the incline, the large trees in the front yard, and the half cornfield in the property next to me, most people in the street below wouldn't notice me in the backyard unless they were actively looking. However, I can see the street clearly. This incident happened Saturday evening. The county was holding its annual Independence Day spiel with a community barbecue, music, fireworks, etc. I didn't attend because it's just not my thing. Plus, I have a dog and the sound of fireworks could be traumatizing, as I'm sure many of you know. Before the big show, I took the dog out to relieve herself in the backyard. There was still at least an hour of daylight, but the entire neighborhood was pretty quiet because most everyone was at the fairgrounds or various other holiday events. So when an unfamiliar, large white pickup drove slowly down the street, I noticed. It must have turned around at the end of the street because I saw it again, moving in the opposite direction only about 20 seconds later. This time it turned into the parking lot of the road department. Now, people have been known to toss things into the empty garage trucks, usually at night to avoid getting caught, because they don't want to or they're unable to make the trip to the landfill themselves. Usually it's things like furniture or broken equipment, but I didn't see any of those things in the back of this truck. The driver was a somewhat stocky guy of average height. He took 3 large black trash bags from the bed of his truck and tossed them one by one into the hopper of the garbage truck. Then he left. Now, I swear I'm not one of those meddling rear window types who always thinks activity is suspicious and that their neighbors are up to no good, but something about this didn't sit right with me. Normally, when I see people tossing their garbage into the trucks and leaving, I don't bother reporting it because it's relatively harmless. But this time, I had a gut feeling. So I called the police. If anything, they could get the guy for illegally dumping trash from a barbecue or whatever. While I'm on the phone with dispatch, I put my dog inside to cut down on distractions while the officers investigate. A few minutes later, an officer arrived and I crossed the street to meet him, gave him a description of the events, and pointed out which of the trucks the man had tossed the bags. He found the bags, took photos. He put on gloves and told me to stay back. The bags were tied in a knot at the top, and it took him a minute to untie one because of the gloves and how tight the knot was. But eventually he got it open, looked inside for a few seconds, then twisted it closed and took a few steps back. "Dear God," he hissed under his breath. "What?" "It's a body." I felt sick. I could tell he felt sick too. I saw him grow pale. His hand was trembling when he held the radio. Even his voice was shaking as he gave the code to dispatch. The dispatcher sounded confused when she asked him to repeat it. Within 10 minutes, the county sheriff was on the scene. Even he looked sick at the contents of the bag. The coroner arrived about 10 minutes after that, and the first officer walked me back to the house along with another one who arrived at the same time as the coroner. Though I showed the first cop via the app on my phone when I described the events initially, I now showed them the video on a larger screen. The camera caught footage of the truck as it drove by both times, as well as pulling into the parking lot, though unfortunately not a clear view of the license plate or the man tossing the bags out of frame. We watched the footage over and over, pausing frames, the officers taking notes. Ultimately, they requested this footage as well as a copy of the files from the past week to see if the truck had been in the area before. I've also been saving footage until the road department installs their own camera this week. Because this is still fresh, I don't know many more details. I know the body was in pieces, as they said, but I don't know the age of the victim, the gender, cause of death, any of that. Information hasn't been released to the public yet. I don't know if the coroner has ever been able to identify the body yet. A police cruiser has been parked at the fire department next door for constant surveillance in case the guy comes back. The guy who dumped the body was likely a local. How else would he know that he could dump there? He probably thought it'd get buried in other people's illegal trash accumulated over the holiday weekend, and the sanitation crew wouldn't have bothered to investigate. When I think about how this guy lives in my community, it makes me physically ill. To think that he had clearly scouted the area for a dump site, that it may not have been the first time this had happened, that this could happen again. If I hadn't called it in, if I hadn't been in the backyard at the exact moment, or if I had ignored that gut feeling, the victim would have never been found, may never find potential justice. Their loved ones may never have closure. In fact, there's a possibility that it might just happen again to another poor soul, and I just hope that it's not me.